Good afternoon, everybody. Again, this is William with the as an education intern here at the JC Raulston Arboretum. Thank you guys for joining us on our midweek. I am joined here today with the Director of Horticulture, Greg Paige, on our midweek program of Lesions, Cankers, and Burls. Oh my, and oh my, am I excited to hear what he has to say, and I'll hand it over.
Thank you very much. Fear not, Blake is here. He's behind the camera today, keeping us in line. And the title to this talk is a little bit ominous. It kind of delves into some of the not so nice parts about gardening and plant healthcare. And when we were brainstorming for this had the most flash and appeal to it. So what I want to talk about today are those things in the topic, obviously, but we get asked a lot, what's on my plant? And that's a pretty broad, generic term. And we wanted a nice, flashy title to bring the masses to hear me talk about this. So I'll be talking about those things in the topic and a few other things. And hopefully that'll germinate some questions in your brains, and you can ask us lots of questions. A couple disclaimers. I am not a plant pathologist, but I worked around some of the best in the world for almost 20 years. And I like to think I absorbed some of their energy and their knowledge and their expertise. I've also spent a good chunk of my horticulture career doing integrated pest management and being interested in all those weird things that are on your plants. So I tell you this with the forethought of saying, if you do have problems in your landscape, seek a professional plant healthcare person. These are good kind of highlights of some things that we see in the garden. So without further ado, the very first thing I want to talk about is a burl. And the reason I want to talk about that first is I don't have any good examples of that. I've got a couple of lame pictures that I'm going to share to highlight what a burl is. So a burl is something that you typically see on mature trees. You see them on oaks quite a bit, walnuts, hickories, cherries, and other things. And it's often caused by sometimes a bacteria or a fungal disease when the plant is young. It also could be caused by a wound, and it's just a lot of those plants' cell tissues really, really super close together. It's super dense. And what those things are used for is they're great for furniture makers because they have a really interesting grain to them. They're also used to make bowls and wood sculptures and things like that. So they're highly sought after from that perspective. If you have one of these on a tree in your landscape, it's not going to cause harm to it. In some instances, if you look at how big this one is, that could structurally cause some issues. If you've got a tree with a burl on it close to your house like that, I would be concerned that might fail at some point. But not something you're going to see commonly in landscapes. You'll see these in forests and parks and bigger settings, not so much built landscapes, but it is something that you do see. And we get asked about this on occasion. There's a couple of these along the Mountain to Sea Trail, a section that I used to run a pretty good bit. And I couldn't find pictures of those, so I had to settle for that. So that's the first mystery in the title is burls. The next one I want to talk about are lesions and cankers. Lesion is just another name for a canker. And canker diseases are often on the stems of trees and shrubs. And the first one that I've got a pretty good example. This is a red twig dogwood, and they get a Botchosphaera canker very, very frequently. And you can see in this stem here how all this tissue is kind of ate away. And it's kind of sunken in nature. It looks like it's sunk into the twig. That's a sign of a canker. And again, that is often caused, that can be caused by an injury. It can be caused by stress in the plant. But the fungal disease, Botchosphaera, is what causes this particular canker. And it's pretty common in and the colored twig dogwoods. There aren't really good treatments for this other than pruning it out. If you see this on your red twig dogwood, the best way to control that is just to kind of prune it out. If that's on the stem of a tree, that's a whole different ball game. But for red twig dogwoods, it's not uncommon to see that. So you can see that sunken nature. You can see kind of that discoloration of the stem there. And that discoloration shows up a little bit better in this sample. And you can see the nice green tissue here, and all this has gone kind of off color. And the canker has formed kind of right there. So the way to get control of that is to cut it off a few inches below that dark tissue culture. Something else that causes this, a lot of people will cut back their red twig dogwoods to get that nice winter color, and doing that every year really stresses the plants out. And I've noticed over the years of working in gardens that if you're cutting them back every year, you have a lot more canker, you have a lot of insect diseases too. So every 2 to 3 years is a better prescription for kind of keeping that at bay. And with this and with all things that I'm talking about today, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, is keeping plants healthy and happy in the landscape. And one last look of that canker on the dogwood here. You can see that stem in the middle is gone off color, and right here that canker has started to form, and it's starting to kind of take on that sunken look. But you can clearly see that discoloration in the twig right there. You've got the red color, and here it delineates from that color to kind of an ugly brown to a dun color. Also, you'll see that the foliage up above that is starting to get kind of wilty and isn't as strong as on the rest of the plant. So that's pretty easy to see in a dense stand of the dogwood. So that's one part of the canker that I wanted to talk about. Another example of a canker, knew that was going to happen. You see cankers on trees that are kind of smooth bark quite a bit, so red maples, some of the smoother dogwoods. This is a Coosa dogwood that was right near our back gate. And again, you can see that sunken area, that discolored area right here where the canker has started. A lot of times in smooth bark trees, sun scald will kind of start that process. The tree gets weakened and the disease comes in and forms that canker. And again, the way to control that is to try to prune that out. So this is one that has already kind of done the damage. The upper portion has been dead for quite a while. And this was a newer canker on a stem that looks pretty healthy up above. And again, you can see that sunken area, that kind of discoloration where the canker is starting to do its thing. And when you cut that tissue, I don't know if you can see that, Blake, but you can see that discoloration and the xylem and the phloem and the parts of the plant that feed that. When you cut into where that canker is, you'll often see that discoloration. So in pruning, you want to get past that discoloration into better tissue. So those are cankers kind of in a nutshell. Another thing that I wanted to talk about that we get asked a pretty good bit about are leaf galls and twig galls. And you see those a lot on both trees and shrubs. Some of the trees that jump to mind when somebody asks me about galls, you see them a lot on oaks, you see them a lot on hickories, and the genus Celtis hackberry is known for lots of different types of galls. So this is a Korean hackberry that's in our collection. And if you look at that twig, you see a lot of fruit, and kind of blended in with that is this little gall right here. And this is a hackberry petiole psyllid gall, and it's caused by an insect called a psyllid. And a psyllid is kind of like a leafhopper. It's really, really small, very tiny. And what that insect does is it lays its eggs on that petiole tissue. The eggs will hatch, and that first instar will start to form this callus from the tissue around it to protect itself so that it can feed. And in some of these psyllids, there'll be multiple insects inside of there. This particular one, I think there's only one insect. So that really blends in well from a camouflage standpoint. Looks a lot like the fruit, and that insect's going to be protected in that vulnerable stage of its life cycle until it matures. I think they mature, and it'll come out of this in about September, late fall, and start the whole process over again. It'll turn into an adult, they'll mate, they'll lay eggs, and start that whole process again. But you see this quite a bit on almost every different species of Celtis. There's also a psyllid that will do that on the leaf tissue, and it's just tissue that protects that insect at its vulnerable stage of its life cycle. And a little bit better example here. You can see that swollen tissue right around that petiole, and there's a fruit right next to that. So if I were to cut that open, somewhere inside of there is that little guy watching the wrap up of the Olympics and just kind of chilling out in a really protected spot. He's probably called some DoorDash, and he's just kind of hanging out in there and doing his thing till he reaches that life stage where he can start that whole cycle over again. But the more you look, the more of these that you see. But we get asked about this quite a bit. Does this harm the plant? Not really. It's aesthetical. It's not real pretty looking. The galls that get on leaves are even more unattractive and doesn't really cause harm to the plant. It just kind of looks bad. But you know that insect serves a purpose somewhere in the greater food chain.
Now, talking about cutting, I know I've got a question. When we were looking at the canker of the dogwood, and we had that discoloration, is it smart to cut where you cut, or can I cut just at the branch that had the discolored?
It's better to go, that discoloration is that disease actively doing its thing. So it's better to go back to where you have clean tissue. So oftentimes you'll have to sacrifice a bigger branch to get rid of that diseased tissue. That's the best thing to do. There aren't products that you can spray to keep cankers from happening. There are cankers that affect the trunk of trees that are really, really bad and cause a lot of damage. Phytophthora canker is a really bad disease in oaks and other things. And a lot of those cankers, including the twig ones, stress is one of the first things that makes that happen. So when you plant too deep, when you do the big mulch volcanoes, when you overwater, when you underwater, if you hit the tree with a weed eater or a lawnmower, all those things cause stress that make the trees more susceptible to the diseases like that. And that's when you see cankers coming in. Thin bark plants like redbuds and maples are susceptible to sun scald, which also kind of stresses the plant out, and then that canker comes in. So twigs you can prune off, and stems themselves on tree trunks is a whole different ball game. But again, it's just observing and being in your garden and keeping those bad things from happening. Good question.
Thank you.
Good question.
Yes, and just as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we will get to them as we
take them all
along. We take them all.
The next thing I want to talk about is something we get asked about quite a bit. So this is a crepe myrtle, and usually what people ask me is, what is that black stuff on my leaves? What's causing that? And this is our newish friend, crepe myrtle bark scale. And here in the back is a really good infestation of this soft-bodied scale. This is an introduced pest from Asia, and it affects crepe myrtles really, really badly. It came in from, we think, Texas several years ago, and it's moved very rapidly up the East Coast. It's into Virginia now and probably further. But the life cycle of this insect is, these are the adults that you see now underneath this waxy coating that protects themselves. They don't move very much at this stage. They're anchored into the branch here. They've got very long mouth parts, so they feed into the fluids of the tree that they're hosting on. And that material has a lot of sugar in it. When they get what they need and they exude that with their excrement, that excrement is high in sugar, and that attracts this sooty mold and powdery mildew, the black that you see. So that's a secondary byproduct of this disease. So underneath this insect right now, there's an adult. They're feeding. They will lay eggs fairly soon and die. And late winter, early spring, those eggs will hatch. And that's the most susceptible stage of this insect. That's called the crawler stage. So all those babies come out from underneath their dead parents, and they go out on the ends of the stems to look for places to stake their claim, and then they'll start to produce that coating and cause this problem. This usually goes unnoticed until you see that horrible, ugly black part. But there's a couple ways to control this. The best, again, is keeping your plants stress-free. People that cut them back hard and top them, that causes a lot of stress. Planting them too deep, too high, where it's super dry, that causes stress. So that's the first line of defense. Second line of defense is mechanical. You can take high pressure water and brush these off pretty effectively, but you're not going to get them all. You know, every nook and cranny has some of these guys in there, and they're pretty gooey right now. They're kind of wet and sticky. So that will help a little bit, is just blasting some of those off. Another round of defense is using a horticultural oil in early spring when those crawlers are out moving about. They're more vulnerable to that control. The horticultural oil, in essence, covers its body and keeps it from respiring and causes it to die. Those are the safest, easiest things. In bigger, mature specimens, you often need to go with an insecticidal treatment. And there are treatments that you can drench into the soil where it's only taken up by the roots. And there are treatments that you can inject into the stems of the plants. Early spring, again, when these things are the most vulnerable and the plants aren't in flower, is the best time to do that. There's tons of information online about this. I encourage you to seek it out and find out more about it. But we get asked about this so much, I wanted to bring it up today to actually show you what it looks like. This is not the pest. That's the secondary thing. Here are they in kind of all their glory. A really good infestation here.
Now, you're talking about these black cankers on the Japanese crepe myrtle.
Yep.
But we've got a question here from Sophia asking about specifically plum and Japanese flower apricots. Would it be the same, similar?
No.
Or would it be different? Okay.
That's different. So there is a disease called cherry black rot that gets on things in that particular family, prunus and those things. That is something that I think is caused by, I think it's fungal. I'm not 100% sure, but you see that on the ends of stems, and there are certain ones that are more susceptible than others. Some of the purple leaf sand cherries are really susceptible to that, and we'll get covered with that. There are some fungicides that you can spray that help treat that, and that's one of those things that it gets to the point where it just looks terrible. And in a lot of cases, it's easier to remove the tree and start with something that's more disease resistant. That's what we tell people. But that's a different thing. There are other scale insects. One in particular, magnolia scale. It's a great big one. It produces a lot of honeydew that in turn produces this sooty mold. But that's a different thing. This comes off pretty easy, with water, but. It's unsightly. This gets on everything underneath the tree. If you've got a grill or a picnic table or a deck, and this also inhibits photosynthesis because it gets so thick. It's just a disgusting insect.
And then another specific question on the cankers on the pecan trees. Would that fall under one of those two categories, or?
I'm not familiar with cankers on pecan. That's kind of out of my horticultural realm. Nut trees and that sort of thing. Hickories, that is a pecan, and there are some leaf galls that get on hickories. There are some twig cankers that get on hickories, so I'm assuming they're the same thing. And those are something that can be pruned off, and a lot of times they fall off. And cleaning that stuff out from underneath your trees would be important in that kind of situation.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, next, I think this is an insect that most people are aware of. This is our friend, the bagworm, and this is a kind of an interesting insect, their lifestyle, their life cycle. They primarily eat conifers. This is a hemlock that this one is on. And when these are very small, the adult, it's a moth, I believe, lays her eggs on a host plant. Those eggs hatch and the little larvae come out and they start attaching pieces of the plant that they're feeding on onto their bodies and build a cocoon around themselves and use that to feed on while they're going through their life stages. This is one that's come and gone. The adult was probably in here and the eggs will be inside of there as well. When you see this on a plant, they actually will move around because they usually infest at a very high rate. Lots of things like arborvitaes. Sometimes you'll see these on birch trees that are close to arborvitaes, and they'll use birch leaves to help camouflage themselves. But it's a really interesting insect. Inside of there, the adult feeds and continues to move up and down the stems until they get to this stage where they close it off and pupate and turn into an adult and fly out and mate and then lay eggs and start that over again. Not a big problem for us because we keep an eye out for these things. You see this a lot in commercial landscapes where things are kind of planted and people walk away and never go back. I have seen these so bad on a place that I used to work at. I picked a 5-gallon bucket of these off of a hedge of arborvitaes one time. Really, really bad pest. It's easy to control. If you get it early enough, you can prune the branch off where the small ones are. You can pick them off, but that takes a lot of time. You can spray this with the product BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, I think. It's a naturally occurring fungal thing that feeds on Lepidoptera insects, and this is in the Lepidoptera insect family, so it's only going to hurt these guys. You can spray that in the foliage, they ingest it, and the disease will kill them. Very, very easy. You can use insecticidal soaps. I've controlled them with that. If you have really bad infestations, they'll completely defoliate a conifer, which is a bad thing. So scouting your landscape, looking for these and getting ahead of it is the best way to keep it from becoming a problem.
You mentioned briefly about, or maybe more than briefly, about spraying these trees. What about when, we're talking about trees that are 20, 30 feet tall? What is our line of action there? Do we spray? Do we trim?
Yep. Threshold of tolerance is important with treating pests. We don't like to tell people to go out and spray to kill every insect. It depends on how bad the infestation is. So something like hemlock woolly adelgid, which is a really bad pest of hemlock, it's actually wiping it out through the mountains of North Carolina. If you've got an 80-foot tall hemlock, how do you treat that with a spray? And traditional arboriculture and plant healthcare would be to spray it with either insecticide or a soap or an oil and spray that into the tree. There are a whole new science of insecticides out there that you can put into the soil, so it's just going to that one tree. The tree takes it up. There's no collateral damage of stuff spraying everywhere, and there's a whole new category of insecticides and fungicides that you can inject into the trees that work really, really well. Again, this is something for a plant healthcare expert to do. This isn't something that you go to Lowe's and buy stuff to do that with. Those are the ways that I would do that. You can still find people that will do the old conventional sprays, but I like to tell people to do things that are less impactful and more sustainable. And use some of those mechanical things. And again, the cultural, taking care of things on the front end is the most important.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah. The next one I want to talk about is an interesting insect. This is canna leaf roller, and they have reared their ugly head right now pretty dramatically. So you can see how this foliage looks like it's kind of stuck together. And inside of here, the insect has sewn these leaves together with, I don't know if you can see that, Blake, but you can see the little fiber there, the little threads. So it has sewn that leaf together to build itself a little refuge away from predatory insects and other things to kind of feed and cause damage to cannas. It's like unrolling a sandwich. So a couple things have gone on here. Right here is the pupa of that insect. It's already gone from larva and it's going to turn into the moth that causes this damage. But you can see here where it's fed on this leaf and it skeletonized this. All this is its droppings here. But you can see the damage that it's caused. And again, this is an aesthetic pest. It's not going to kill the plant. It's going to cause it to look kind of bad. These leaves are kind of ugly and messy, and it's not going to be able to open the leaf and photosynthesize. An easy way to control this is exactly what I did, is just to prune it off. I want to see if I can find an adult here. Larva wreck, actually. It is kind of late in the year. Nobody home here. Same thing. There's a pupa that just fell out. But you see this a lot on cannas. This is easy to control by pruning it. You can use a soap. You can use the BT that I mentioned. And again, this is just, again, culturally, getting rid of this stuff because it has the pupa in it is an important step. Just to clean up in your garden. It also affects, there are leaf rollers that are on red buds, and you see that a lot this time of the year. And I did see some larvae on this guy earlier, if I can find one that's closed. No such luck. But the same kind of thing. It has kind of sewn these leaves together, and there's one right there. Little tiny guy, striped. See him right there? There's another one right there, heading for higher ground. So they'll sew those leaves together with that webbing, and they'll skeletonize and feed on those leaves. A lot of time with red buds, they'll be like two together for whatever reason. I see that quite a bit. But the thicker leaved, the Mexican variety, you don't see that as often, and I think that's because the leaf is a little bit thicker. But again, this is not going to kill your red bud. That just looks bad. And this is easily controlled by pruning it off, cleaning up these leaves, and if you wanted to use an oil or a BT earlier in the spring, that'll kind of keep it from becoming a problem. But there's an older leaf that has the threads have broken free, and all these are the droppings. It just aesthetically looks kind of nasty and gross. Another one that we get asked quite a bit about is lichen and moss. And I always get asked, is that going to kill the tree? And the complete opposite. Lichens typically will grow on slower growing plants, and it's actually an indicator of a healthy environment. Lichen take nutrients in from the air, and if you live in a place that's highly polluted, it's going to inhibit the growth of these. So when you see these growing on trees, that's an indication of a healthy environment. You don't see these on fast-growing trees that often. Usually it's slower growing things. It's not going to hurt the plant at all. It's not going to inhibit growth. There actually are I know hummingbirds will use this to line their nest with, so it has a benefit of that. I think it's kind of attractive. It adds another dimension and color. These are widespread, I think, on every continent in the world. I think I read a stat that said lichens cover 8% of the world. You see these growing a lot in areas on the ground and other parts of the world, but it's not something that's going to cause damage to your tree. Contrary to popular belief too, they don't just grow, lichens and mosses don't just grow on the north side of the tree. Typically it needs to be shady and have some moisture in the air, but nothing to be afraid of. Not going to cause damage. And the last one, you look at this. This is a branch off of a maple tree, and it's kind of hard to see anything that's going on. But if you look a little bit closer, it's got a big honking piece of mistletoe coming out of it. And mistletoe doesn't cause damage to the tree per se. Again, it's an aesthetic thing. It is a parasitic plant. They'll bore into the tree and use the tree's nutrients and moisture to sustain itself. It does. You see that it's green. It does photosynthesize, but most of its life force is coming from the host plant. You can prune these off, but it's in the plant and it's going to pop up again. It'll take it longer to come back. Where this is a problem is on, again, stressed plants. You see this. There's a tree I drive by in the morning downtown that has more mistletoe than leaf tissue on it, and it's on a really, really stressed out plant. There aren't any treatments that you can do to keep this from happening. I've read some research where they've tried some things. It's mostly aesthetical. This is used for lots of things during the holidays. It is poisonous, the berries on it, so it's not something you want to keep on hand, especially around small people. But it is something that we get asked about quite a bit. And for whatever reason, there seems like there's more here than there is in Charlotte, where I used to live. But I notice it a lot more here. But it is something that we get asked about quite a bit. What is that growing on my plant? And that was all that I had on my list to kind of go through. Are we riddled with questions?
We have a few questions about specific plants. We've got one from Carolyn here. She's got a winter flowering camellia.
Okay.
That's got some spots on its leaves, and then the leaves eventually turn yellow. And she's asking if you have any suggestions on what to do about that.
Well, it could be a number of things. They do get some algal leaf spot diseases. And there's also some nutrients that could be affecting it. So I always lean heavy on getting a soil sample, see what's going on in the soil to see if it is some kind of a nutrient deficiency. And that's a relatively easy thing to do. I forget, we just talked about this a couple weeks ago. They're free for a certain time frame if you go through extension, and then they cost, but the cost is minimal to get valuable information on what's going on in your soil, what you need for good plant growth and development. So I would start with that. That's the best advice I can give without actually being there looking at the actual plant. And we don't do house calls, unfortunately. As soon as we get caught up here, we might start to do that, I think.
Good to know. We've got one question from Jared. He has, see if I can say this correctly, Styrax japonicus. It didn't leaf until nearly July this year with small, incredibly small even leaves, comparably to last year when it was completely healthy.
Again, hard to say without being there. The first thing that popped in my head is I'm wondering how deep it's planted. A lot of times if you plant too deep, that's something that you will see is that the growth is stunted and really small. Another thing is we talked about cankers and canker diseases. That will slow down the uptake of nutrients to the top part of a plant, so it might be something like that. So Styrax are prone to that because they're a smooth bark plant. That is something that I would look for. And if it is on the trunk of the tree, there's not much that you can do, unfortunately, to treat that. Those are my best guesses from far away. I would take a look at those couple of things.
Good to know. And back to what you were mentioning, just for everybody to know, those soil test kits, if you did not see in the chat, are free from April 1st through November 30th.
Thank you.
Through the extension service. We've got one question from Candace asking about specifically camellia leaf gall and how to best treat that.
That's something, again, it's cultural. It's not going to hurt the plant. The jury is out on what causes that. I've not heard a good explanation as to why. And I scoured the four corners of the Arboretum looking for some. That's usually something you see in early spring. It's real fleshy and weird and kind of scary looking, and you don't want to touch it, but you do. That's something that I've always just pruned off and disposed of, gotten rid of, away from other camellias. And I think some are more prone to that than others. I don't know if that's caused by an insect like a leafhopper that spreads some kind of a viral thing. More than likely that is exactly what that is. And if you've got a lot of camellias, that it always kind of rears its head every so often.
Gotcha. Good to know. Sophia asks, there's a on her boxwoods, on the stems of them, we are seeing black sooty material. She is wondering if there's any guidance there, specifically if neem oil would help, and if so, what are those impacts of the neem oil? Would it kill spiders and other small creatures that might be on or around the bush?
It's never good to treat something without knowing what you're treating. So the first thing is to find out what the problem is, and the second most important thing is what's causing the problem. So I would start there. I'm not familiar with any black sooty things on boxwood. Boxwood are prone and host to a whole gallery of diseases and afflictions. So that is something you might want to get a plant healthcare person to look at, or maybe bring it into a diagnostic lab through extension or something like that to find out what the problem is. Once you do that, then they can guide you with some treatments. I don't like using neem oil because I hate the way that it smells. It's good for a lot of things, but I would much rather use a horticultural oil because it doesn't have that odor. Just kind of gets me right here. But I think that is, oils tend to be non-selective. Whatever they get on, they coat and cover, but they're more sustainable than using a broad spectrum insecticide that kills pretty much everything. Anything that you use as a treatment needs to be used with care, both for the applicator and what you're putting it on, and the other things around it. Being very conscious of the weather. A lot of oils react differently when it's hot. So that's an important thing to do, is not to use, read the label. Don't use those things when it's super hot.
Awesome. And unless there are any other questions, I've got a question.
Yes.
You mentioned there about neem oil and how that there were some good benefits of the use of that, unless I misheard it. What would be some of those benefits?
I mean, the benefits of a neem oil and a horticultural oil are, they are a low impact control. They're not going to stay around for a really long time. They're not going to cause harm to birds and humans per se. They're going to be more targeted on what you're trying to spray them on. That's the benefit of using a neem, as opposed to using a true insecticide or a true fungicide. It's a good first step. It's a good place to start with. I always like to tell people, you have multiple hammers for different things, and don't go after the biggest, most volatile hammer first. Use a sustainable toolbox. Start out with lower impact things. Start out with the cultural stuff first, and then kind of work your way up. And having a good threshold of tolerance. We don't go crazy with the can of leaf roller in the garden because we know we're going to have it. We're not going out to spray. In areas where it's more it's closer to the public eye, we'll pay a little bit closer attention and try to keep those plants a little bit cleaner. Where we've got big beds, it's harder to do those things. We have a different threshold of tolerance for pests and that sort of thing here than a lot of people do.
Perfect. Here we've got a question from Deborah. On the same sort of note, but instead of neem oil, about insecticidal soap. What would you use that for? What is insecticidal soap good for? And would you use it on houseplants? Would it impact, the people that are living in that place?
They do have soaps and oils that are made for houseplants, and keep in mind that those products have been researched and developed with the safety of the applicator in mind, the safety of the environment in mind, and the safety of the plant in mind. A lot of people hear us talking about soaps and they reach for the dish soap or for something else and make their own product. You can cause more harm than good with those. But a safer insecticidal soap is kind of in the same vein as a horticultural oil. It is meant to cover soft-bodied insects, and actually it burns them. So if you think you've had a bad day or a bad week, think about some aphids in somebody's garden that somebody just sprayed with a nice dose of a registered insecticidal soap. You're minding your own business on a pretty rose with all your aunts and uncles and cousins. Somebody comes and sprays you, and it starts to burn your body up, and that's how you die. That's a bad way to go.
Yeah.
So that's what soaps do. Again, it's that kind of that first line of defense. They're not going to cause a lot of damage. They're not going to stay around for weeks and weeks and weeks. They're not going to get tied up in the soil. But when you are treating plants, house plants or things outside, you might want to take them outside, spray them, let them dry off, and bring them back inside. That's what we do with things that we deal with like that. And you're not going to treat them over where your cat is taking a nap or the dog is hanging out. You have to keep those things in mind as well. They are a safer alternative, but they can burn. You want to protect your eyes, you want to protect your hands. All that stuff is super important.
Great. Well, thank you. It seems like, unless there are any other questions, we are good. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Greg Paige, for joining us today and teaching us all about cankers, burls, and everything else.
Thank you for hosting, and I'll take this opportunity to thank you for a lovely summer. All the best in your endeavors. And
Thank you.
And if you didn't come back to see us, that would be okay too.
Well, I'll be back, I'm sure. I'll be even back next week for our midweek program with Tim Alderton. Yeah, so once again, thank you all for joining us on our midweek program. And yeah, that's all from me. Cool.